Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Thea, and today we have an inspiring interview with Dr. Christy Randazzo, who will be sharing their experience of being non-binary in academia. You're going to love what they have to say about authenticity and alignment in scholarship. All right, let's dig right in. Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. I have with me, this is Coach Thea, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I have with me a very special guest today. I have Christy Randazzo joining us here to talk a little bit more about being Enby in the Academy. I would love it if you would introduce yourself, share your pronouns, a word about your scholarship, and kind of bring us into your world.
Well, welcome into my world, I guess. Thank you very much for having me on, Thea. This is, I think, the first time that I've been interviewed about being non-binary. So this is sort of a cool opportunity for me. My name is Christy Randazzo, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs. And my research area is actually in theology. I do work specifically trying to undermine sort of specific paradigms of theology, which emphasize white supremacy and power. So I do a lot of work. I'm a Quaker theologian, and I do work in sort of Christian theology that specifically tries to bring in a queer and pacifist and kind of a radical lens to think about God in ways that are much more open and freeing and liberatory. In some sense, I always thought that I got into theology to make theology and Christian theology less shitty is sort of the way that I thought about it. Less, what I was taught as a kid never felt right to me. And I always felt that it was, simply, it was power masquerading as belief. And I thought I may as well get a doctorate and try to change that. So.
Yes. I love it. And I'm assuming you are out about being a non-binary person in your field?
Yes, I am very much out. In fact, I preached a sermon on Sunday in this community about this idea I'm playing with called non-binary theology. Fully wearing all of my regalia and this lovely dress I just gotten over the weekend. And it is a part of who I am as a scholar, and I don't hide that. And I don't think that anyone should hide that. So.
Let me ask you, take that question a little bit even deeper. What does being non-binary mean to you? Because one of the beauties of having deconstructing the binaries and the boxes is that, we have this freedom to understand and interpret. So I would love to hear what it means to you.
I like to say that I realized that I was non-binary intellectually before, I guess, my body was able to realize it physically. Physically, I'm thinking of the emotions of feeling non-binary and feeling what that meant. In that sense, I'd never understood the need to follow rules that were prescribed that didn't seem to fit everyone. So when I was a kid, somebody would tell me something about, who God was, and it didn't fit everyone. And I thought, well, if it doesn't fit everyone, and if God is for everyone, then obviously that theology is wrong, not that God is wrong. So if there was a way of thinking about being a human person that didn't fit everyone, then I rejected that idea and instead thought, well, there's got to be a different way of thinking about this. But I was raised in a more conservative environment, and we moved a lot when I was a kid, and we moved all throughout the South. And I had no sense of what it meant to be, I guess, myself without all the other boxes that were given to me.
Mm-hmm.
I had a sense that the idea of the boxes didn't make any sense. They didn't apply to me in the same way. But I always thought it was just because I was this radical person who wants to break the rules and everything else. So when I got older and got married and had kids and the usual thing, I started to actually think about what it would mean to be different, and how when I had a daughter who's now 15, so 15 years ago, when she was born, I was just entering seminary, and so this sort of weird, incredible time of like all my ideas kind of starting to be questioned and everything else. I thought, how was I going to raise my child? And I thought all of the prescribed boxes that I was told about how a daughter should look, of course, didn't apply to me, didn't apply to my spouse either. You know, she rejected all of that as well. So what actually happened was the sense of, how can I be who I am in the world without being confined by the boxes that I never felt fit anyway? And it started this long process of deconstructing so much in my life. And then when I got to, gender in a way, it was like, hitting this point, then this thing, then this thing, then this thing. I realized that all of the roles, all of the assumptions, all of the ideas of gender never actually worked for me. I don't fit into a gender. And then it sort of hit me within my body emotionally once my brain kind of clicked over. It's like I had this feeling inside for my whole life that never, nothing was ever right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And then when my brain sort of had the alignment of like, oh, maybe gender doesn't actually work for you. Then suddenly I felt this incredible sense of like freedom and joy. And like, it's like that idea of gender euphoria really struck me sort of profoundly. And it was incredibly frightening and absolutely scared the living shit out of me, and was just horrifying for a while, because it was so, I'd always been this sort of radical trying to push against the status quo, but pushing against gender feels so profoundly foundational that I actually ran away from it for a year or two. But eventually it hit this point where I think it was the first time, I think when I got my ears pierced, I had earrings for the first time, and they were these little, very simple studs, very, very simple, small earrings, but just that little bit of physical adornment, because I've been taught my whole life, like you have to wear like cargo shorts and really unfashionable things. And, a very specific bland colors, like Kelly green, navy, and khaki. And so the first time that I have something that I thought was not just beautiful, but actually specifically pretty, is sort of this unfortunately feminized word in our society. The first time I had something pretty, it felt overwhelming for me in a way. So that when I started trying other pretty things, other ways of dressing, it was sort of like, once I got a little bit of it, I couldn't stop. And I just kept going further and further and further down until I had a point where I was like, okay, well, am I at that place now? Am I good? Is this where I am? Is this who I am?
Yeah.
And it was a moment of freedom in a way. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not really quite sure that I answered your question if it felt like a very roundabout way, but like this, what I think of how I sort of encounter gender in my mind is the sense that gender literally makes no sense to me. It doesn't make, sense emotionally. I don't feel connected to any gender expression. I don't feel connected to any gender role. I don't feel connected to any of the gender rules. I truly feel as if I am me, and however I feel that day is how I'm feeling. And that doesn't apply to a gender. So, yeah, I mean, it is this sense of, like the little argument in the non-binary community. Am I, non-binary, gender non-conforming people, are they trans, Are they not? And I guess for me, this question of I would consider myself trans in that sense that all of the expectations of gender don't actually work. So I'm almost outside of that system in a way, doing my own thing. So I'm, in a sense, creating a gender every day.
Mm-hmm.
It's this fluid, constantly shifting, almost like a lava lamp. Things are always moving and shifting and different colors popping up. So it's an exciting way of being, but it's also, in a way, you're stable in that sense that nothing is stable.
I love that image of a lava lamp. What a great visual to kind of capture that fluidity and fabulousness. And I should mention, because you did mention like the impact of having your ears pierced for those who are not able to see you, who are receiving this podcast right now. The first thing that I noticed about Christy when they jumped on the call were these absolutely gorgeous dangle earrings that are just silver and just radiance. Those are absolutely gorgeous. I have earring envy. So definitely noticed that as soon as you jumped on the call, and I appreciate that. I wonder, given this great sense of fluidity and creativity, how that is received in academic circles and in the settings where you do your scholarship.
It is accepted in the sense that there are some who truly appreciate it and are really excited by it, because I think that, if you go to any academic conference, everyone's wearing the same sort of different measure of like plaids and like, certain coats and browns and, sort of this business casual from the 60s kind of thing. And so there's a sense of appreciating a spark of something different, visually and presentation wise. But I found that academia is also profoundly conservative in the sense that you can bring something colorful and interesting, but you're always going to be seen as, salt on the table. You're kind of the adornment. You add flavor, and you aren't actually could never really be seen as the main entree, I guess. So much depends on whether it's a community that is excited by difference and excited by sort of the idea of being able to break down boxes and paradigms, or if they're not.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that being somebody who is often read as male, because of the fact that I have hair and I have hair in places that people who are male tend to have hair, there's sort of this sense of I need to almost over-present in a way in order to be read as the gender I am. And when that happens, when I over-present, then that I get the fullest possible positive response. But I then get oftentimes the fullest possible negative response. And there is going to be, like I found in some settings, again, because I work in the field of, theology and religious studies and Christian studies, Christian theology. There are a mountain of people who are, profoundly excited by, this movement towards celebrating gender fluidity and difference. And people have been waiting for this for such a long time. And of course, there's those who are not. Mm-hmm. So what I oftentimes have to lean in some specific settings is I have to insist on constantly putting my CV out there in a way. I have to constantly introduce myself as Dr. Randazzo, which feels very exclusive and doesn't work for me as a Quaker. We're not really about titles,
right,
and hierarchy and use of power and status. But in a way, in order to be seen as if I belong there, I have to insist that I am a doctor and I have published these things. And I have to constantly sort of insist on getting that level of acceptance in a way that I found other people don't. Like if I just walk in with a tie and a coat and, so the expected presentation, no jewelry, I'm just seen as, it's assumed that I have something worthwhile to say. And in a way, even amongst people who are who would be seen as their gender expression might fit a traditional framework of what woman looks like. For example, there's, sort of the sense of, if I come in all of who I am, there's sort of this insistence that I'm obviously treating gender just as a game, just as a presentation, just as a costume. So I actually get significant sort of almost angry pushback from people who fit a certain understood gender box of traditional womanhood in a way that I wouldn't in other ways. It's almost as if my existence itself is sort of a statement against them, when in reality it's got nothing to do with them at all. It's all just about me. So what I appreciate is that when I come into settings as a Christian theologian and I sort of lead with that and say, why, yes, I am wearing a dress, and why, yes, I am, all of these other markers. And I then leap into my scholarship. There is sort of always this expectation of I'm going to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about. So when I sound as if I am an expert in the field in which I'm in, it's always
because you are. Right.
Because I am. Yeah. Like anyone who goes through this entirely long process that's the point. I get treated as if it's this sort of shocking thing. Like, oh my God, it can speak.
Wow. Yeah.
And it can say something meaningful. So it's one of those things where you have to sort of carry all of who you are constantly around, like this backpack, and you're handing out your CV to people. Or people just sort of see me as this funny little adornment, like, oh, wow, you look so beautiful. I've appreciated seeing you walking through the conference hall. And I go, great. Okay, well, let's talk about scholarship. Oh, I'm heading on. Thank you. I'm not really interested in that.
Wow.
And yet there's other people in my field who absolutely love that I'm there and love that I'm breaking down boundaries, because it allows them more freedom. It gives them space to sort of start pushing at some of the boxes that, even if you are sort of a cis woman or a cis man, like the idea of those boxes are just as restrictive to them as it is to me. So there's an appreciation there sometimes. So, yeah, I would say that I get this panoply of responses that run the gamut. And I'm actually sometimes both pleasantly and unpleasantly surprised by who reacts and how they react.
Hearing you speak about it just sounds really exhausting. It sounds like you have to work so hard just to exist authentically in the world with other people, right? Not your internal stuff, but like to exist publicly as an authentic human person. It sounds really exhausting. And I wonder, you did mention how you get both of these like wonderful positive reactions as well as the extreme negative reactions. And I wonder if you would share for us, what do both of these look like? What do the positive reactions look like? What are the negative reactions that you encounter? Whatever you're comfortable speaking about, what are those like for folks who may not, live in that experience?
There's the negative institutional reaction. For example, I worked in this K-12 private school for a while as a religion teacher, because just like everyone else in academia, there's just not as many jobs out there. And I was a youth minister for a while, and I love working with kids. And this was an opportunity that popped up. And my experience at this school was profoundly negative in that when I got hired for the position, the headmaster on the call, this was early on in sort of my transition, and I'd been blogging about that experience and all that. And I wasn't blogging for anyone else except for myself, really, in the end. And they found it because it's not really a hard thing to find. And, this was supposed to be sort of a progressive religious school. And the headmaster asked me, I said, I know that I can't ask you to remove this blog from the internet, but I would, want to offer as a suggestion, until the community is comfortable with who you are and what you're about, maybe you might want to remove that so that, we can not have unsettling questions. I had to wait a year before I put my pronouns in my little email signature line. And then as soon as I did, within like a month later, I was put on probation for something nonsensical. And then after the end of the year, they decided not to renew my contract. So there's that extremely negative interaction where I had, again, a perceived code of action and behavior and ethics and dress, a perceived way that I should dress, but was never specifically stated as such. It's like this passive aggressive kind of, we want you to make sure that, the community can see you in the fullness of who you are, and you got to give them time. And so, of course, as soon as I gave them time, it's as if the time was just, this ever lengthening line that was never really going to actually end.
Right.
So that's an institutional response. The personal response is normally it's just people looking at me like I have 5 heads, like I seriously don't belong, or they get offended at my existence. Particularly at theologians and religious scholars, our sort of guild is the American Academy of Religion. So you go to this conference and there's 10,000, 12,000 people at it. It's pretty big. It's, the conference of religion scholars in the world. And you walk around and you are bound to run into people from all across the spectrum. And I'm aware constantly that I have eyes on me, which again, I'm a person who is white. This is an experience that BIPOC people have literally all the time. So, this is not new to a vast section of the population, but it was a profoundly unsettling experience for me, having people walk past and both smile and glare. And just being in space, it's like you lose that sense of privacy in a way. You're immediately a public figure simply by having a certain cut of clothing on your body. So I'd say that in terms of me being accepted in the academy itself, in the right settings, in the right place, when I lead with my scholarship, it's almost like, okay, well, they can accept me for who I am because they go, okay, well, all right, Christy's proven themselves. Once I've proven myself in some settings, then it's sort of seen as, well, I'm just an unusual eccentric in that space. I haven't lost an academic job for it, but generally I've been an adjunct for years for a variety of reasons that we can get to later. But, in a way, like what's been amazing for me is that the students who have a problem with it, it's not really my problem, it's theirs. And none of the chairs have had a problem with it because, in a sense, being dispensable is weirdly freeing. It's like, well, you're odd and eccentric, but you're teaching these numerous intro classes of, intro to religious studies that we need some warm body to be shoved against. We don't care what you look like. But I can say that being physically presenting and incorporating myself into the classroom or into the online classroom space has been incredibly freeing for me. And I've really cherished the opportunity to hear back from students who said, just seeing you in this space, being confident in who you are has allowed me the space to accept that this is who I am, or just accept that my worldview has been expanded. So I've gotten a few really wonderful emails that I've saved from people who said, thank you for, you've helped me come out. So, it's a multifaceted thing. And a lot of it is related to the fact that I don't have a great deal of power in the academy. And the power I do have, I try to wield in the most sort of liberatory way possible.
Right.
So I think me being non-binary, if I was specifically trying to pursue, some, job at Harvard Divinity or something, that I might either be tokenized,
right,
or it would be a problem.
Right.
And I don't know, because I just don't want to play that game.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of that process, just hearing you talk about it, it sounds very dehumanizing, right? Whether it's being tokenized or just being glared at for existing. So I appreciate your generosity in sharing those experiences with us. And I wonder how your non-binary identity specifically relates then to your writing as well.
For one, there's the sense that I can't not bring my personal self into the work. I mean, I am a humanities scholar, and there is this sense that at some level there are some fields that might push more towards the subjective and more towards the objective. And humanities scholars, I found, or at least in theology, it's about creating sort of mind space, creating worldviews, or sort of highlighting worldviews and a new way of looking at worldviews. So it is inherently subjective in that sense. But I have to admit, I don't know that any scholarship is truly objective. Even just what you choose to focus on, the work you choose to focus on, the way you frame the results from your experiments and whatever, it's inherently subjective. It can't not be. So I think that a lot of my work is rooted in my experience. And I think everyone's work in the academy is sort of rooted in their experience. So this isn't different because I'm non-binary. Mm-hmm. I think that, if you are of a gender that is historically privileged, that is, you might not be thinking about your subjectivity in the same way that someone who's marginalized would. For example, there's this field called systematic theology, which is sort of looking at the big questions, who is God? What does it mean to be saved? What is the concept of sin? What does it, mean for an afterlife? And what is a good life or is a bad life? These huge questions. Then you sort of develop literally a system of thinking. So hence the name. And it is one of the most conservative fields in theology, profoundly conservative, because of the fact that the idea is systematic must equal box, and box must equal tradition, which I reject utterly, because, who is God, who is divine is a constantly fluid sort of thing, depending on culture, experience, and, your own personal experience. And, just even how you understand, how time works. Is it circular? Is it linear? Different traditions will teach different things about that. And these are fundamental, like, is time circular? Is it linear? It is like what your brain is built on. So when I go into these sort of, fields of systematics, I specifically choose it in a way because it is seen as this sort of, you can have all these other ways of thinking, like if you are a Black theologian, then you're seen as, you're in this little hole somewhere.
You get liberation theology. You stay over there in liberation.
Exactly. You stick with your liberation theology over there. If you're a womanist, you stick with your little womanist box over there, and all the wominists talk to each other and all that. But we have what is the core, right? Mm-hmm. We have the truly foundational piece of that, which of course is itself coming from a specific place, a specific framework, a place of privilege. So I always felt that the idea of, like, let's say Asian American theology is sort of separate. I say, well, no, their theology, they just happen to come from that perspective. So I reject the idea that systematics is sort of its own little thing off in this sort of this weird separate world, different from humanity. It is humanity. So if I'm coming in as a non-binary person, then my scholarship will inherently be speaking from that experience. And I don't hide it. Mm-hmm. I say, systematics is, I always start off by saying, the very idea of it being this tradition that is objective and removed from human experience, I reject that entirely from the outset. And I definitely lean into the fact that I already have a doctorate and I'm published. Be like, oh, well, yes, I know what I'm talking about. See, you have to listen to me. So there is a little bit of like, I have to play the game in order to be taken seriously in that regard. But now that I have the proof, quote unquote, of the power and truth of my position, I then specifically go into these spaces to try to crack down on the assumption of objectivity and say, like, well, there is a non-binary way of understanding systematics, which comes from my experience. And that way will focus on breaking down boundaries, reimagination, creativity, flow. So in a way, like, my non-binariness sort of continuously rejects the idea of eternal dogma inherently. Right. I don't really know how you can be a non-binary person and look at certain theologies that are seen as like handed down from the divine and not reject that inherently. So I guess in a way, what how it informs my work is that it insists on always breaking down boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And it insists on subjective experience. It insists on this sense that there is no one way of doing something. So, I write a lot of theology on like peace theology, ways of reimagining God that are more liberatory. I haven't specifically written something that is, specifically non-binary theology, but the work I do always finds a way to tweak or reject a rule and undermine it. And by undermining it, sort of strengthening it, making it better in my mind by expanding. I would like to maybe one day sit down and actually write this out as a non-binary, one person's vision of what non-binary theology looks like and have a systematic theology of non-binariness or something. But I haven't had the time to devote to those because those are pretty intensive projects. But it's like, in a way, if you see my work and you know that I'm non-binary and you know that that's what non-binary means to me, then you're going to be able to easily see that sense of breaking down and trying to be fluid and creative.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to reading that non-binary theology systematic theology, when you get around to, making it concrete. I know I would love that. I have this conversation often with folks who hold marginal identities about like the game that you have to play that you've mentioned several times is like, as a Quaker, not really holding on to titles or kind of hierarchical power structures or kind of not really your jam. And then still having to leverage this cultural capital and these resources that you have in order to legitimize your scholarship or even your sense of like belonging in a room. And I wonder if you would kind of speak to that as well. Like, how do you navigate that tension?
Navigate the tension of having to continuously play that game?
Yeah.
That's good. That's a great question. I'd say that the tension itself, I find that, at least in my understanding and expression and sort of experience of sort of, like accepting my marginal identity in a way, like I could have rejected it. I could have lived in the world feeling like I was cis and sort of hiding things off and all. It's possible. I didn't really unpack everything and actually even have that sort of, oh my God, wow moment that realized I was, queer and gender non-binary and all that until I was about 30, actually. So it is possible to do that. But I think that how I view the tension is as something that I have to play with. I have to be creative with. I almost have to see it as this sort of, not a game so much as a way of continuously sort of tweaking. Like, in a way, being non-binary is itself this opportunity and also a responsibility to continuously tweak. And you do that just by being yourself at some level, but then you also have to push further than that. You can't just, in my mind, I think in a way, you have a political responsibility. That idea of the personal is political. Everything is political. I have this inherent responsibility to go out. And now that I have at least a place in this crazy thing known as the academy, I have the responsibility to be present in that space, be as non-binary as I can, for lack of a better term, in order that can crack open space for other scholars to come in who are younger and sort of ensure that they feel like they're welcome in this space. So, definitely a sense of duty, definitely a sense of responsibility. But I appreciate screwing with those expectations. It weirdly derives, I derive a great deal of pleasure from this.
Yes.
Because it is either I find it crushing and soul crushing and I give up, or I have fun. Because if I'm just constantly angry, which I am the very fact that I have to play this game pisses me off, like you would not believe, profoundly. And it pisses me off even more the very idea that us having these kinds of, walls and boundaries and all that. And the fact that my skin is given more privilege than anyone else's for nonsense. That pisses me off on an absolutely fundamental level. But I can't walk around the world pissed all the time. I can't be angry constantly, because that actually starts to erode my own self. It undermines my ability to do that sense of duty I have to, if this white skin gives me space and privilege to be in certain spaces, I have to deconstruct that space. I have to find a way to be that little piece of sand that just wears down at the expectations, the little wedge that cracks things open. And so that so much else can come in, right? And in terms of being non-binary in this space, I think of it as I have a responsibility to be fully authentic to who I am, because of the fact that if I don't, then I'm letting people down, and I'm letting myself down. So yeah, there's that. And also it's just fun. I really want to emphasize this idea of gender euphoria. I love being who I am, there's this whole narrative of sort of born this way and all that. And I understand the necessity of it, but I feel like we've lost the beauty of just choosing that being queer is just awesome. I love being non-binary. I love being who I am now. I love the ability to kind of be myself in the world. I love this part of myself way more than I ever loved myself. I feel like I love myself now at 42, than I've ever loved myself in the previous 40 plus years of my life. And that is hard won. And I think of it as a necessity. If I don't love who I am, then I cannot give love to others. And if I'm not giving love to others, then I'm not doing that necessary duty of being present and giving space for other people and possibly other states that are experiencing a vicious pushback and some vicious laws being passed. So in a way, my queer and so non-binary joy is revolutionary in that I shouldn't be happy.
Yes.
I should be unhappy somehow, which I think is bullshit. Excuse me for coaching on the thing here, but it is absolute nonsense. So yeah, it incenses me that I must play the game. But if I'm going to play the game, I'm going to have fun while doing it.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that sense of joy and authenticity. It just makes me misty because isn't that what we aspire to, right? That we should all have space and freedom to find fun and delight and joy. It's, there's struggles and there's challenges, but to center the pleasure, the joy, the excitement is such a gift. And I wonder, in the interest of having more joy, what are ways that colleagues and community members and allies can support, can help hold space? What can folks do to help make that possible?
I would say that for one, I think the most important aspect of being an ally, and I say this as someone who tries to be an ally in ways that my privilege demands. So thinking from that perspective, I think that I would want people to be allies in the way that other people have told me that I should be an ally, where I am constantly sort of, using one of my favorite Quakers is Bayard Rustin. And, he said that we need to basically be a wrench in the gears of the world and how the world works, and constantly throw ourselves into those gears and make it stop, break it down. So I think in terms of allies, people who have the ability to kind of throw that spanner in the works, so to speak, that's a necessity, I think. If you have the ability, for example, to ensure, I say the lowest bar is to ensure that you have gender diversity specifically in academia, on panels. You have diversity on books that you edit. You have diversity in your syllabus. And that's across the board. I must have diversity of ethnicity and of culture and of race in my syllabus, or else I'm failing my syllabus and I'm failing my students. In terms of the ways that I can sort of ensure that things are broken down, is that when I mean, even just like small things where if somebody starts raising an eyebrow, if they happen to see me walking past in some other setting, immediately say, do you have a problem with that? Just constantly pushing back where you're seen as accepted in this space, push back against that acceptance. That's a power you have. It's uncomfortable, but even just a little bit of going, I don't agree with you here, can start to break down people's expectations. It has the ability to do that. But like so many things, like if you have the ability to hire, if you're a dean, try and hire people who are aware of and living into this experience. I know there aren't that many non-binary people in the world. I think there's more than we're given credit for. Like there's this idea of like, why there's so many trans people now? It's like, well, I'm left-handed. And I saw like this graph where like left-handedness was like almost like 3% of the population at most, like in the 1920s. And then like has gone up now to around like 11 to 12% of the population and has stayed pretty steady. It's like, well, it wasn't because there was only 3% of, lefties. The water didn't mutate us or something. We just weren't allowed to be who we were, right? So in my mind, there's way more non-binary people out there. And I think we're going to see more people when we have the ability to see more people. So try and, seek out these different perspectives and seek out scholars who can sort of contribute in these different ways, in hiring, in panels, in works, all that. And then I guess the last thing is, like my theology is worthless if it's not deeply informed by Black theologians, womanist theologians, Mujerista theologians, Minjung theologians, like all these different cultures. And like, I have to be informed by them. I have to, use their knowledge to teach me. And then by teaching me, then having a different perspective and placing those people in ways where others can read them as well, giving them a bigger voice. If I have the ability to make a bigger voice, I constantly have to use it. So I'd say that allies would be people who are maybe reading the work of non-binary people, finding ways of incorporating that work in ways that seem unusual. My spouse is a scientist, and I'll admit, I don't really get science, but like, it's just not, I'm a humanities person. I have like 4 degrees in humanities. Like it's where I am. This is what I've devoted my life to. I know it. I know my world. However, I know that you can expand any scholarship, any syllabus, any conversation in ways that incorporate these different perspectives. Because inevitably, this marginalized position is going to impact my view. So I think of, one of the challenges I think of sort of Western capitalists, cis heteropatriarchy, is this idea that we must be individual.
Yes.
We must be ourselves. And I think that in your scholarship, if you're thinking about sort of the lone individual, if you're thinking about sort of being an individualist on your own, that actually is perpetuating white supremacy. It's perpetuating patriarchy. It's perpetuating anti-queerness. And if you think about your research instead in this much more collaborative way, much more community-based way, much less like we're grasping for, limited resources, then we have a much more interesting stew as a result. So it's not just the specifics of get some damn queer people on your panel. It's also how you approach your work itself. It's a fundamental mind shift, I'd say.
Yeah, it sounds like a real, a hefty invitation into like more of the intersectionality, right? Because, once you start to shift and broaden your lenses, it's not just kind of a performative inclusion. It becomes more radical, as in like at the root, right? It becomes a lot more meaningful. And I think that's a wonderful invitation, right? Into allyship with any marginalized community. So I appreciate you lifting that up. That seems really valuable, and it goes beyond, right? Like, okay, like we should set the bar higher than just call people by their names and use their proper pronouns, right? Like,
yes, it is a thoroughgoing thing.
Let's aim a little higher than that, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's sort of like, even down to the fact of like, okay, yes, we're finally acknowledging that particularly white people in this land, stole the land from the indigenous people who had already been living there. This is stolen land. Okay. Well, okay, you can do a land acknowledgement in your email signature. Okay.
Right.
That's the lowest bar possible.
Right.
You know, it has to be a much more like you have to reimagine how you think. And that is difficult. It is profoundly difficult. But in a way, I've had to completely reimagine who I am, realizing about my own gender. You can do a little bit of the work yourself and your scholarship will be better. You will have more fun. It's difficult. But why are we doing this if it's easy? No one who has done academic work at any setting has not had struggle. And you know how to work. We know how to work. So just do the damn work.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think that affirming the humanity of others only helps us. It reflects back on us, right? If we're able to hold each other's humanity, that only makes us better humans as well. And really, I think part of what we strive for with our programs is really that shift to change the culture of academia. And these are really concrete ways to start doing it by shifting these lenses. So thank you for that. And I wonder, of course, how are you going to be celebrating International Non-Binary Persons Day?
Well, my family disowned me a few decades ago, and so I have some chosen family, and we spend time every year together during the summer, whether we're camping or whether we're visiting each other's homes or what have you. And this year we're going to be camping up in the mountains. And on that day, actually, is when sort of the trip begins. So I'm going to be celebrating it with people who I love, who love me for who I am. And I mean, we're definitely going to raise a glass to the day. And I'm just going to be enjoying being around people who love me. So I think in some sense, that is the best way of celebrating ourselves, regardless of whatever day it is, whatever experience you have, whatever day sort of recognizes you, is to be around people who love you for who you are and who, thoroughly celebrate that. So, I mean, personally, a personal celebration is going to be with people who love me. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that. Is there anything else that you want us to know?
I think the most important thing that I really would want people to leave with, two things, is this sense that all of the boxes that you expect are hard and fast rules, not as hard and fast as they really are. They're much more fluid. They're much more sort of porous. And I think that as we're seeing the academy, I mean, let's be honest, as we're seeing the academy start to crumble, it's this sort of big brutalist concrete structure that is starting to finally break apart. And, we're starting to see some weeds pop up in the spaces, and things are starting to kind of become more organic. And, these previously considered impenetrably, impossibly solid structures are dying. They just are. So I think as we are seeing them dying, we need to be creative and courageous in how we kind of reimagine what's coming next. And we need to start thinking about what that looks like now. So if I think of non-binary as not just a gender, but as a perspective, an approach, I think that, one of the things I think we really need to do is to start reimagining what this could even be in a much more collaborative way, in a much more community-centered way. I mean, thinking about the founding idea of Kathy's work and the work that your organization does, which is, sort of about trying to, promote a new way of being women and then women and non-binary people in the academy. It has to be less hierarchical. It has to be more collaborative. It has to be less bound up in the monetary structures of the past. We're facing a dangerous time in so many levels, with Supreme Court decisions coming down and with the United States kind of cracking up and with the world kind of experiencing all these things. So if we're not sort of being creative and joyful, thinking through to what's next, then we're going to get subsumed by the depression of it all. And we're going to be incapable of reimagining the world exactly when we need to. So I would say that in my mind, thinking about being non-binary in the academy should be at some level everyone's job. We should all think about reimagining this world. And, like in that sense, in that vein, I really want to stress, if I can in a way that's on a secular podcast, is that there are so many religious people who are not bound up in the power games and the destructive terribleness that a lot of my co-religionists play in. And to just try and, you do not have to believe in anything, but just try and start listening to this wider diversity of voices who are trying to insist on reimagining these ideas. There might be ideas that don't impact me, that I'm not, a believer of, but if I don't deal with them, it's like, if I don't understand what Hinduism is, I can't really understand what it's like to live in New Jersey. If I don't understand what it means to be Muslim, I cannot live in the Northeast. It is impossible, because that's just the nature of the world. So I have to be aware of these other ways of viewing the world. I have to be open to new ways of thinking about it. So you have to do the work to expand, how you think about all manner of things, including, religion and faith.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for these invitations into creativity. I think that I'm going to be pondering and reflecting on that invitation to really see that non-binary perspective as a catalyst for creativity and for hope. I really love that. That really resonates with me. So thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for your generosity in sharing who you are and some of your journey with us, with the world, with your students, with AR. We just really appreciate you and celebrate you. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. It was great talking with you.
Hey there, this is Kathy, just popping into the end of this amazing episode to let you know that right now we are enrolling our Amplify Faculty Writing Accelerator program. If you're ready to go up for tenure with more confidence, if you really want your pre-tenure experience to happen on your terms and not lead to burnout, if you're looking for a new and different way to do academia in a really, really supportive community so that you can be your best self as you put your writing as well as your teaching and service and everything out in the world, then Amplify is the program for you. It runs September through February, and we are enrolling through the end of July. You can go to kathymazak.com/amplify to watch an on-demand information session and find out all the information you need to enroll in our program. I hope you go check it out. We'd love to see you in Amplify. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.